Okay, here we are with slide 9, and we're going to talk about how dramas worked at this time here in the late Middle Ages. So there were typically many, many short plays that made up what's called a cycle. And there was very little attempt to connect these short plays. And medieval audiences probably weren't really bothered by that because they just believed that events occurred because God wills them to occur. So they weren't looking for a lot of like deep, meaningful connection between anything. Everything was in God's hands, according to them. So there wasn't a lot of precise chronology either. There were frequent references in these plays to biblical characters commenting on things that happened long after their time. For instance, like there would be a play where Noah, remember like the character of Noah from Noah and the Flood, right? Like they would have Noah commenting on something that happened like 1,000 years after he supposedly died. And again, the audience of that time, the medieval audience, wouldn't they wouldn't be confused about that at all because they believed that our existence on Earth is just a super short preface to eternity. So they'd be like, "Oh, that's cool. Like Noah's just, he's living his whole life in eternity now, so he can still comment on things that happened 1,000 years after he died. No big deal." Um, all the dialogue was in rhyme. It was in rhymed verse, so everything was rhyming. There was very little characterization. They weren't like developing these complex characters or anything like that. Um, Here's the one thing that's really interesting. Many of the biblical incidents that deal with miraculous occurrences depended on really convincing theatrical illusions or special effects, right? I mean, there's a lot of Bible stories that have miracles happening in them, right? And so to act those out in a drama, you kind of needed special effects. Um, and the Christian were really devoted to this because they wanted the scenes to be as realistic as possible because they wanted this to like reinforce the audience's faith in Christianity. So the more realistic they could make the miraculous event in the play, the more their audience was like, whoa, and then they would be more faithful towards Christianity. Um, so to make all these effects happen, they invented the idea of like flying actors in through a system of pulleys. Um, and they started using trapdoors in the stage for sudden appearances and disappearances of characters. Water was really important for lots of the plays. If they wanted to act out Noah's flood, for example, there's evidence that in 1501, in what is currently Belgium, tons of water was stored in wine barrels on the roofs of adjoining houses to produce a continuous rain that lasted for 5 whole minutes, which is actually like a really long time to have one special effect of rain happening on stage. So it's almost like we have Christianity to thank in part for special theatrical effects, which is like kind of like a fun, crazy theater history tidbit for you. Um, some plays, even though of course they had this huge religious purpose, did still have comic moments, usually to show humans kind of failing against the divine commandments. And the comedy was used to kind of like still teach the religious messages, like, ha ha ha, silly humans trying to go against God. Um, and these cycles of plays often ran for an entire day or for several afternoons in a row. They were really long, and sometimes back to back days in a row is how this all went down. Okay, I'll see you on the next slide.